Thanks for joining us for Political Talk on another PolitiPod Live. Tonight we'll cover Middle East movements, the Hormuz schmooze. We're going to have an issue update, a fascism creeps, and what the hell does that mean? And Stooges of the Week. I'm Hannah Soldner.
And I'm Matt Nisanoff. We'll start with the Middle East movements. Recently, there was a big vote in the House of Representatives. It was put together by Ro Kahana and Thomas Massey, one a Democrat, one a Republican. And the vote was to stop funding or stop certain funds going to Israel that they use to purchase weapons with. And the reason this is noteworthy is because it's the first time it's happened. And also that it made it all the way to the vote. So the leadership didn't prevent it from happening. And that's kind of a big deal. It was defeated. There were all of the Democrats plus Thomas Massey, uh, but it was defeated with 314 votes. Now, one of the results of that is the APAC, the money side of the campaigning, one of the political action committees that does that is in support of Israel. It's called APAC, and they went through the list of who voted against or who voted for this, and if they have them on their website as supporters, they remove them from the send this candidate money section. So there's a lot going on, and in addition to all of that, Hamas, which was supposed to disband and disarm, which was part of the agreements that were trying to end the current wave of violence on both sides, um, Hamas, instead of disbanding, has a new leader who they named. One of the, if you know much about Hamas, part of it was that it was started by some people at a university, some professors and others at a university, and it's one of the old guard, so to speak. One of the people from the university has taken over as the new leader. And also, will so first, what do you think about that, Hannah? What do you think about the Middle East?
Well, I think that we'll see with this new leader of Hamas. Um, it's I don't want to make light of the violence that Hamas has done in their past, or in any way forgive what they're doing. But in some sense, there does have to be some point in which these sort of um, regimes that kind of grew out of a violent past have to find some way to govern. Um, and I think that just going in and blowing them up is just going to get worse and worse and worse. When you had like Al Qaeda, which led to ISIS, et cetera, et cetera. So at some point there does have to be this. Um, if we're ever going to achieve peace, that does involve paying attention to people and not just seeing them as terrorists. Not that they're not terrorists, but just as dehumanizing. Not that we have to like them, but it's good to be aware of them. Um, and that's as far as the new leader. And it's also worth noting that Israel is also having an election coming up in a couple months, or a month and change or something. And so we'll see how that happens. Netanyahu is, I get the impression he's not even popular with the people he's popular with. Um, but and then as far as this, the funding and the APAC, I don't know if I really have much to say about APAC. They're a very strong lobby. I haven't looked too much into them, but this funding and the vote for it is kind of showing that there's a little bit of um, cracking, sort of across the political spectrum. The what's happening within Gaza is not popular, and then we'll talk about this more in a bit. But what's happening in Iran is even more not popular. Um, and there's been, as things have been going on, I think that there's and as this has sort of been sitting in our life for a while, what's happening between Palestine. Well, that's been going on for a long time, but this most recent thing since 2023 is now coming up on its third year, and then what's happening in Iran has been going on for 6 months, and I think that's given time for some people to sit and maybe develop nuance. We'll see. Um, but I think that this is going to end up being I think we might have talked in one of these podcasts a few weeks ago, or maybe a month or so ago, sort of some of the fracturing that's happening on the right between people who are sort of leaving the Trump camp, either because they're hardcore pro-Israel or hardcore America first. Um, and that fracturing is also happening on the left, and we'll see what kind of comes out of this shuffle.
Yeah, excellent point. Yeah, it's Tucker Carlson has apparently even said that he's considering starting a third party. And the only difference, it seems, the only difference is the issue of Israel and how to respond, or where what your position is. He and Marjorie Taylor Greene starting their own party would certainly be an interesting twist, and would and how that would wind up having an effect would is certainly worth watching. It's certainly interesting to follow. We'll see if he actually does that, or if it's just something he's saying.
Right.
Okay, moving on. Our next issue is the Hormuz Schmooze. And we've got two or three things. Firstly, the ceasefire, which has failed miserably as more bombing has been taking place. Several more U.S. Troops have been killed in the exchange of missiles and what's going on. Trump says that the U.S. is going to take over the straits, and initially he said he was going to have a additional 20% fee that he would charge, or he would take 20% of the fee that would be charged, and take that for the U.S. to cover their costs. It was not a popular idea. A lot of people were not at all responded very poorly to it, to the point where he went and said, "I'm not going to do that. I will do something else." But in the meantime, European allies were saying, "Well, 20% thing is a ridiculous, attempt at just graft." And meanwhile, the Iranians said, "Well, let's not be too hasty in calling something graft. I mean, there could be something there. It's not a bad idea." And they started to talk about how they wanted to charge, but they said they wouldn't make it 20% because that was too much. So what Trump wants is definitely too much. But hey, maybe the idea has some merit uh, from the people who are currently controlling it. Anything on the weapon side or the monetary gain from the straits?
Um, I mean, it's very Trump to be like, oh, let's make money from this. Um, and I was reading an article today about this is sort of more about what's happening in Palestine, but I could definitely see it happening here. You know, there's this whole like Trump has kind of threatened. This is within Palestine to like rebuild it as some sort of like capitalist, vacation wonderland. And I feel like he's always going to be that person who's like, oh, can I get some money out of this? Um, and I would imagine that, obviously we're doing terrible in Iran and had never done it. I should never have been there. But if we were being more successful in our attacks there, I would imagine that he would have used it for like you know, um, Trump
And it's
Persia or something.
right,
Um,
right, as a piggy bank somehow.
Yeah, exactly. Well, but not only a piggyback, but also like a golden calf to his future of like, I did that. He does a lot of things that are, um, I don't know if it's this is always him, so it's not specifically that, but I don't know if it's that he knows that he's at the end of his life, and so he just wants to leave an impact or whatever. But yeah, I feel like that would be him. But anyway, that's conjecture. But yeah, his idea of like, oh, let's get some money out of this, especially when he said like that was never going to be a thing, and that was something he and his his allies had complained about, and his enemies, to be fair. Um, yeah, of course,
Yeah, all you have to do is look at everything he's ever done,
right.
and and you see the trend.
Well,
And
and
of
it's also sorry, it's also very much a trying to fix something that's not broken.
as long as there's some way to include his getting some money out of it,
Right. I'm
or
sure he would charge us for fresh air.
getting a profit out of it. Right, right. Fair point. And then the another question that's come out is, where's Congress? War is supposed to be something that's decided by Congress. They did not decide on this. In the hearings on some appointments that have come up, there are some of the Congress members who are starting to say, actually bring up that point. We didn't authorize this, and this is not something that we have something to do with. And how is it that you want more money? And how is it that you come to us and ask for all these things when you didn't even bother to include us in the important decision? And so maybe there's some backbone that's growing. Maybe some of the results of recent elections are starting to pull out some opposition that was not there, or at the very best was hesitant before. So that's a step in the right direction. Certainly not enough, but at least it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean it's Congress has been very just kind of like letting stuff happen, even though there's so much. It's almost it even feels weird to say it out loud, but this is all very unpopular from like all sides. Like it was one thing to like it was a lie when Trump said that he had a mandate after the election. And there was no reason to not push back because definitely the conservatives would have. But yeah, it's wild to not push back on something that is extremely unpopular.
This is true. And another issue in this is that Hegseth, as I mentioned, someone going to ask for money, that's Hegseth. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, has gone up to Congress and said, hey, we just passed a 1.2 or $1.5 trillion budget for the Pentagon, but I really do need another, what is it, 78 million or 87 million or something. And it's somebody's, until somebody actually does push back, they're going to keep going. They're always going to get a little bit more. They're going to say they need a little bit other thing, and there's always going to be something else. So it's good to see that there's somebody who's actually objecting to this sort of craziness. And also, Hegseth said that of some of the recent service members who were killed in some of the Iranian counterattacks, he said they were a sacrifice. And even Marjorie Taylor Greene had a response to that. She made a public statement asking Hegseth, "What the fuck are you talking about?" Now, that's a direct quote from her comments, not just me saying that. And so what it's this whole reaction thing is starting to happen on their side as well, which is very, I think that's a very positive step as things move forward. Anything else on this before we move on?
No, well, just one little thing. There was originally a report of a couple deaths. There's been a report of at least one more since, uh,
Yes.
and it's weird to have this like Hollywoodification, I guess. I don't really even know what to call it, but there is something about that. Like this is something you would see out of like a movie. So it's
And
weird.
actually, one of the service members who just As you mentioned, there were two who were killed the other day. One more, one of whom was a 19-year-old.
Yeah.
And so that's the sort of thing that catches people's attention. Once there's a once service members start getting killed in larger numbers, and the younger they get, that's going to be something that I think you'll see a reaction even from the staunchest of the support the troop crowd start to get squeamish. So we'll see what happens, but certainly unfortunate that that had to give their life in through their service. Next up, we've got the issue update, and we've got another three or four things here. We're going to talk about the United Kingdom and their new PM, some information on the some U.S. elections. We'll mention the merger between Paramount and Warner, and also try to get in something on what's going on with that lettuce, the cyclospora update. But first things first, UK has a new prime minister officially. Andy Burnham, who was just brought into the House of Parliament as a member, has run for the top spot for the prime minister's position. As mentioned before, the in the parliamentary system, the leader of the party is the person who is made the prime minister. And so they've had a change. The Labour Party has had a change in its leadership, and therefore that person becomes prime minister. There was an opportunity if other people wanted to challenge in a vote, an internal Labour Party vote, well, Labour parliamentary members vote. But the other people who had said they would run against Keir Starmer did not want to continue once it was Andy Burnham who was the top guy. So he came in, he was the only one running, and he was made prime minister. He's completely shaken up the cabinet, brought in a whole different slate of people, although several of them have rather familiar names if you follow British politics. What do you got on that?
Yeah, so Burnham, so well, just a little bit of background, not on Burnham, but this is the UK's seventh PM in a decade. Um, the shortest was Liz Truss, who I think was around for 11 weeks or something. Um, but it's just been, and it's been across a couple different parties, the two, major parties in the UK. Um, and there's just been a lot of shakeup and a lot of disappointment. It started with the Tories, and they just went through a whole, rota of people. I was going to say a Rolodex. Is that a thing anymore? A Rolodex of people, and then Starmer came in a wave of support, and he was amongst a lot of sort of shakeup elections throughout the globe. And he really didn't do much, and what he did was not great. Or it was very not great is not the right term. It was just very like nothing really changed. There was no big sweeping overhaul. And I think it left a lot of people frustrated that, like, hey, we rallied for you, and what are you doing? And so I think it makes sense to have Burnham just going in, and like you said, there's some familiar names in there, but he's really shaken up a lot of the cabinets. And Burnham, he's been the head of the Labor Party for 4 days, and the PM for 2 days. But I do want to say that he has a lot of experience. He has experience being as an executive. He was a mayor. Um, he worked in the shadow cabinets of Miliband and Corbyn. Um, and he's just done a lot of things, both like very basic kinds of like working on you know transportation and these kinds of like sort of wonk things that kind of get lost, especially in America, where we sort of think about our chief executive as like and especially Trump kind of leads this, but even before, as sort of like a superhero. One of my Canadian friends would say that the president of America is always the most American person. um, And but it's nice to know that Burnham has some experience doing uh some of this just like very simple grunt like quality of life, simple things you need, not simple but like not controversial, not that that doesn't make them difficult, but they're not like like buzzwordy issues, just like, hey, this thing needs to be fixed. um and so I don't know if I could say I'm hopeful after 7 p.m.s in 10 years, but I'm glad that it's not Starmer.
Well, and the one thing I will disagree with you on is that I don't think it was a sweeping mandate for Starmer when with the election a couple of years ago. It was it wound up putting Labor in power, but it really seemed to me like it was more people were just sick of 14 years of the Conservatives, 14 years of the Tories. How can you go? I mean, of course, there was a backlash to it, and also because they did so poorly. They did so much to help their allies and friends, and not enough to help the actual public. And that's, I think, where a lot of disappointment was about Starmer because he came in and he was like, okay, watch, I'm going to be competent and I'm going to be efficient and I'm going to get things done. I'm not interested in the PR stuff. I just want to get to work. And everybody said, oh, okay, we'll do that. That'd be great. And that's not what happened. And in fact, the issues that you very well could say would be expected from labor, such as the winter payment to seniors and getting things. There's a payment that went out from the government to make certain that people had heat in their homes, and Starmer did prevent those from going out because he wanted to save money and he wanted to show that he could be sort of conservative leaning or whatever the message behind that was supposed to be. But it was wildly unpopular, and obviously so. I mean, that doesn't take a lot of that doesn't take a lot of thought to figure out that if you're going to act like the Tories when you get into the job after 14 years of Tory failure, then it's not gonna work well.
Yeah,
And
and oh, go ahead.
no, no. So I was just going to say he was constantly trying to sort of lean to the right and to do things that were sort of to show that he wasn't to the left. And in doing so, he just made himself amorphous, and things weren't being done. What Nothing was efficient, and so people responded to it. That's the thing that Burnham has to look out for, I think. The difference between here we go again, here's the seventh guy, here we go again, and success will be if Burnham actually follows through on his promises. If he does the stuff he says he will, if he does stuff that actually benefits the British people, it will be a magnificent victory and was what we needed all along. And it won't matter. The other six people who failed won't matter because he will have come in and done the right thing. Now, if he fails as well, then it's going to be, oh, it's the whole system, it's both parties. Those top two parties are just alike and all that kind of stuff that people like to say when there's a failure from the top. But look at New York City. I mean, with Mondami, he came in. He said, he didn't make any verbose overstatements of his, what he wanted to do and what he was gonna do. He got into office and he filled in the potholes. 100,000 potholes filled in that hadn't been taken care of for years. So he got right to issues that affect people directly, expanding universal child care and other issues that just people, especially from local government, they see directly. So that's let's see if Burnham is able to do that same sort of thing. Anything on the Brits before we move on to the U.S.?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention. Yeah, I thought about bringing up Mamdani also, and that's a thing that I have been appreciating it as a New Yorker. I would love for it to sort of gain in prominence. Where we had a recent election here, a primary election, and one of the people who ran just in a very local was like really interested in like a 4-day work week in UBI, and it's like that's great, but you are in a small section of Brooklyn, you have no control over that. Um, and so and it can be said, like um I'm not a Brit, and I think that there is something to be said about. There was a comedian who once said, "The more I know about the people in your country, or the people in your like the politicians in your country, the worse your country is doing." Um, and I think there's something to be said about that. But I mean, like, yeah, like some of the Tory leaders, like Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak and stuff, had like they were known quantities. Maybe Starmer is, maybe Burnham is, but definitely not to that degree of like, if they're known, they're probably known for somebody who's like done some things, not just like this is a person, who's taken some spotlight and we're going to vote for them because they're, whatever, charismatic. It's not what you want. Just be a, I just want you to be a politics geek, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. And helping us to move on to U.S. elections, I will also say, with your point with people taking local issues or taking local runs and trying to, I guess, they're trying to show their values. They're trying to show who they are by looking at national issues, which people know better, perhaps, because they pay attention, because the nightly news is constantly talking about, the 8 or 10 issues that are national. So you say, I agree with this and that. People can say, oh, I understand who you are. But it is very misleading. And there's a number of, and I expect this is everywhere, but there's a number of politicians in Brooklyn who will always say, oh, I'm for voters' rights and I'm for women's rights and I'm for, you know, uh, the a lot of issues that are federal level issues to address. You're not gonna be able to if you get into, whatever it is, city council or district leader of the local party. Those are not the issues that you're going to be facing in office. So you've got to also have an understanding of what it is you actually have to do. In the UK, actually, there were a whole bunch of councillors. So a very local form of government where there were elections in May. A whole group of people from the Reform UK party, the alt right wing, got positions on councils, and then they showed up in meetings and started complaining. Oh, we don't understand how rules work. We don't understand how the process of doing the procedures that you want to do work. How can we know them? We just got elected. It's like, well, this is not hidden. This is stuff you can learn about, but you have to actually bother yourself to do it. You have to actually look into it on your own. You're not going to be. It's not going to be hand fed to you, and people who are just running trying to project a set of values for national issues are not doing you any favors because they're not really telling you who they are. And moving on to US elections, there was, of course, Lindsey Graham's death recently, a naming of a replacement. The governor of South Carolina named his sister, Darlene Graham. And this is something that I had mentioned in one of the previous episodes. Sometimes they bring in somebody who's a relative, a spouse, or a sister or something, and they fill the seat with the relative in order to get to the next election. So they don't expect the person to fill the seat permanently. They expect them to fill it just for this short time until the election happens. And Tom Bickle, who used to be with us, said made an excellent point. Was, well, I don't know that. I don't know what's actually happening down there. And here they have given her the position. Several days later, Donald Trump comes out and says, I want Darlene in that seat. I want her to run for it. And so she's gone from being the temporary seat filler to jumping into the race. She's one of the candidates now. That election is happening on August 11th, so you'll be hearing more about it from us. But his sibling is now in the race for the permanent to hold the seat permanently with absolutely no sort of background in government or certainly not on the federal level. And we'll see what South Carolina voters do. There's a whole lot of people running, so they'll have a chance to make their own decision. Speaking of people rotating through, the Maine's Democratic nominee prior to it being picked There was a particular favorite who wound up not being favorite because of some of his personal activities or alleged personal activities. And since it happened before the nomination, the main Democrats were able to replace him with somebody else. They did a convention. They had something like 600 people from across the state get together and vote on who they saw as the person who should replace the previous candidate. And they did that. They picked a guy named Troy Jackson, who they were able to pick about 2 days before the deadline to get it done. And so he's got a little bit of a shorter time to get ready, I guess, than would have been preferred or would have been beneficial. But Troy Jackson looks like he'll be the nominee, and he'll be the person running against Susan Collins, who was so defeatable, so much of a target. And now with all this last minute changing around, we'll see if it actually is is possible. I'll also mention real quickly the Alaska Democrat who is in the House seat. In Alaska, there's two senators and only one member of the House because of the population of the state of Alaska, and so they only get one House member. The Democrat who is running has withdrawn. They said that the independent who is running is doing much better with raising funds, much better at getting endorsements. So the Democrat has withdrawn and endorsed the independent candidate. I believe his name is Dan Hill. And so we'll see. We'll have to keep an eye on Alaska and see what happens with the House seat. Of course, there's the Senate race as well, which is straight up Democrat and a Republican running. And I'll just throw in that yesterday was a primary as well. It was a primary down in Arizona, and there's some results that are kind of. I'm sure that there's been some celebration at the White House from some of the people who got picked up on their Republican nominations. We'll see how they do come November when they have to actually face competition. So, what do you think about U.S. elections? What do you got?
Well, yeah, I imagine. Okay, I'm just going to go through them in the order you did. With Lindsey Graham's sister Darlene, she has a little bit of political history, but I imagine the reason that they choose a spouse or a family member is probably to assume like you are going to vote the way that your, a deceased relative would have. I imagine it's to sort of keep consistency. Um, but for her to join the race, I'm sure is quite a big shakeup down there that who's already gone through a lot of shakeup because if people are there is an unmistakable power of incumbency. And so if it can sort of hold that idea of like, um, I'm just like Lindsay, vote for me. I'm sure that it can really throw a wrench into the things down there. I don't really have much to say about Maine. We'll see. Obviously, it was a not ideal situation after how they got here, and we'll see what they can do on short time. Um, in Alaska, I guess I just would say that he should just change his name to those two senators that had the same last name, the same names. Maybe that's the way to get in.
Sullivan, right?
And then for Arizona, Arizona, I feel like is a state that's going through like an interesting transition. Like you said, Trump is probably really happy and MAGA with the people who got brought into some of the primaries. They've also got like a semi-robust, progressive wing. John McCain, who was there for a long time, was sort of known for his being a maverick, as it were. We can talk about what happened in his last years of life, but there is something about as a state, it's got a little bit of unpredictability. So we'll see how that goes. Hopefully, not MAGA, but we'll see.
Yeah, excellent point. And it is worth noting there's a senator there who's a Democrat, and the Governor Hobbs, who's running for reelection, is a Democrat. So it is possible for Democrats to win in Arizona. But it looked like in a number of races for House and others, that and governor for that matter, the Republican nominee, they just went with the Secretary of State. They picked a stop the steal, MAGA hardliner over the other candidate who was also a MAGA person who was just less enthusiastic about the stop the steal stuff. So it looked like and the stop the steal candidate crushed the other candidate. It was a very high percentage vote for them. So the Republican Party in Arizona is very ensconced in the MAGA stuff, and they have the people, they have the votes, so they're able to get that sort of candidate in. And as you say, now we have to see what the actual people of Arizona decide. Up to them in November 3rd.
Yeah.
Um, what can you tell us about the Paramount Warner merger that's been in the works?
So, this merger's been going on sort of it's been in progress for a while. Um, Warner has wanted to, so when they got bought by Discovery just a couple years ago, um, the guy who led it, David Zaslav, was trying to, his sort of whole thing was that he was going to cut his way to financial stability. Um, but the thing about Warner, especially, well, two different things. One is they own the sort of like DC properties, the comic book properties, and two is that they own HBO. They own a bunch of other stuff too. Um, but things that are very different between HBO and some of the DC stuff, which are HBO is quite prestige. It's sort of cutting edge, and the DC stuff is I wouldn't classify it that way, but when you think of Discovery, it's a lot of like reality TV, stuff that's um, I'm not I don't want to hierarchicalize like good or bad, but it's pretty low budget, right? You can just get in and like hire a whatever expert, a chef, a home designer, or whatever who's charismatic, and they can just do stuff. Whereas like both a prestige drama and a superhero flick are going to be very high budget, so you have to make a lot of money back. So basically, Zaslav decided to spin it back out. Um, and so there was both bidding from Paramount, who has also just recently gone through an acquisition, and Netflix. Paramount ended up winning, but I think there's been a lot of people, especially some individual states and whatever, who have been like, hey, this is a lot of like shifting around. Paramount was this thing, and then it wasn't too long ago that they merged with, between CBS and Viacom, and then they got bought out by the Ellisons, and then Warner got like bought by Discovery, and then they're being spun back out, and now they're being bought by Paramount, and it's just like a lot of consolidation, a lot of stuff, and it ends up becoming concerning because each time one of these things happens, um, as you can tell from the tenure of both, the new people at Paramount and the new people at Warner before it got spun out, there's a lot of changes. Zaslav killed a bunch of movies, some of which were already completely filmed and ready for release, but he just cut them. And then there's been a huge amount of shakeups in Paramount, and with the election of like Barry Weiss as the news chief at CBS News, and just like a lot of these things have been changing very quickly. And then whenever there's a merger like this, there's also a ton of people who lose their jobs, like especially the sort of back end, lawyers, accountants, payroll, marketing, unless it's very specific marketing for like a show or whatever. Um, but yeah, a lot of these jobs end up sort of being seen as redundant, and then they get cut. And so a lot of these also always involve like a massive layoff in Los Angeles, and wherever else they have headquarters. And so just enough district attorneys and people were just like, hey, this is like not, this is not a good thing. There's too many shakeups. There's too many of these mass layoffs, and to what end? And so they pushed back. And so they got it put on hold to sort of reevaluate, which is, I think, is good.
Now, is it I think I've got it straight that Netflix had actually put in a bid, and which was the lowest bid, and then Paramount swooped in, somehow got a couple of Trumps involved with it, and they somehow all of a sudden the government became concerned and swooped in and somehow undid the bidding system, or they challenged it or something. Is
Yeah,
they
so
bought out?
there was a hostile bid at the last minute, which it's one of those things because if you're a shareholder, right, the people who in theory are shareholders, they get a vote for a merger. Um, but in theory, the shareholders are supposed to do what's right by the company. So even if you have, all your documents drawn up and you're like, hey, we've been talking to these people and they're, good to go. It's good for them. It's good for us. It's whatever. If somebody comes in and bids higher, then in a certain sense there is a duty to, because you're going to make the shareholders and the company more money if you take that. So, those are considered sort of a hostile bid because you're kind of just running into something that's established and settled and causing chaos because some people might not like it. There might have been less discussion, things that are maybe set in stone, right? If two companies are one acquiring the other or they're merging and they could have decided like, hey, this, these jobs are safe, or like that could have been something they argued for, like, hey, this merger is good because, it's not going to be as traumatic. And then somebody comes in and just like torpedoes all that. It just ends up becoming very chaotic and very destabilizing, more so than an already destabilizing acquisition slash merger can be. Um, and there's also been like a lot of the FCC, who's in charge of these. There's been some criticisms on some of their most recent mergers that they have allowed to happen, and so there's a lot of people. They've been getting some uh, enhanced scrutiny recently. So
Gotcha. All right. Thank you for making that make some sort of sense. It's all you hear on the news is 30 seconds, and you don't get into the understanding what the background is. And finally,
hey,
for issue updates, the cyclospora update. Other than watch out for the lettuce, I don't know what the latest is. I do
so
know.
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say I do know Taylor Farms has something to do with lettuce, and there was some concern that it had been discovered that their product was the one that was causing the issues. However, they are big funders of a PAC that supports Trump, and somehow they got a meeting with the White House when it was determined that when the FDA determined it was their lettuce. And after the meeting, all of a sudden the FDA kind of said, "Well, we tested it and it was positive, but perhaps it was a false positive, and perhaps it's not so much this lettuce." So something's going on there, and that's the last I heard.
Okay, so it's very messy and kind of an interesting story, and I'm not even up on the most recent. But so what happened was there was this cyclospora update, makes people very sick. Um, it's a it's a outbreak. Sorry, it's a seasonal outbreak. It happens about this time of year, for whatever reason, I don't know. But and cyclospora is not something you can just give to somebody, even though it causes, all these things. If you're with somebody with cyclospora, the chances you're going to catch it are very, very little. Even if you have like, if you live with them, if you have intimate contact with them, incredibly low, basically none. Um, so um, this outbreak has happened pretty frequently, but it's a big outbreak this year. Um, and so there's been a lot of blaming about, is it Doge related? Some of the people who are monitoring this were cut. RFK, of course, has said that that's not the problem and whatever. But basically, a few days ago, Taco Bell um, recalled all of their lettuce from Taylor Farms, and they're just like, we're not going to use Taylor Farms lettuce anymore. And um, this is relevant because Taylor Farms has been at the head of some of these outbreaks before. And so when people saw that Taco Bell had done a recall of Taylor Farms, they were like, oh, it's Taylor Farms. And so they tested a bunch of their lettuce. This is the part where Matt was saying there was a positive. Um, and then they came back and they said there was a false positive. And so that was already like, conflicting. And not only that, but Taylor Farms asked for an apology. Um, but then whoever tested it came back and they said, well, that false positive um, doesn't mean that it's not infected, and we still like are here for this voluntary recall of your lettuce. Um, so they're like, it might not be, we're not going to apologize because like one false positive doesn't negate what we've seen. So it could still very much be you. And then today, I don't know if it's the CDC or the FDA or whatever, they're investigating a second source. They haven't come out and said what it was, but they're investigating a second source. And then at the same time, Taylor Farms, not only was it their lettuce, but it was specifically tagged as their iceberg lettuce from the specific farm in Mexico. And that city in Mexico is now suing, I think, for defamation, being like, um, especially if there is a false positive, they're just like, hey, this isn't on us. You just like grabbed us out of your people and wanted to throw all the blame to us. So basically, we don't really know what the source is. It could be this lettuce. We don't really know if it's specific from a specific farm. There's probably some other kind of outbreak, maybe from a different company or a different source. So yeah, just keep your eyes out and watch for, you know, recalls. But I read a thing today from a person who said, try not to let the panic get a hold of you. He was like, I'm eating like normal. I just watch for recalls. So
Okay, keep your eyes out for the recalls.
yeah.
We're moving on to the next segment, which is fascism creeps. We have some information of what's going on here, and part of it is that of the three or four things we'll talk about here, we've got Hegseth calling for annual testosterone testing of soldiers. That we have that the National Guard will continue deploying in Washington, D.C. through the current administration. That's been confirmed now that the National Guard is going to stay in D.C. That there was, of course, a rambling speech of crazy whining about the election made by Donald Trump. But what was interesting was that NBC, ABC, and CNN did not cover the story. That is perfectly well within their rights, that they don't have to be at everything everyone ever does. And they chose to skip the rant about the election in 2020. Also, the Tate brothers have been arrested in Miami and will be extradited to the United Kingdom for prosecution. So, from the top, Hegseth and his annual testosterone tests. What do you think?
It's bizarre. There's this fascination with masculinity. Actually, since this is the fascism creep segment, fascistic groups have always been very concerned about masculinity and being masculine enough. And there's this whole sperm count issue and whatever. Hegseth is saying that it's about combat readiness. um I saw a thing today that said that they're testing not just men but also women, and so I'm not quite sure because generally men and women have quite different testosterone levels. I saw a federal judge today said that how can he isn't it hypocritical for him to be doing this and also barring trans people from serving? But I think one of the things that's important is to note that like hormones, if you know anybody who's on any kind of hormone, and full disclosure, I am on a thyroid hormone. I've taken it since I was in my early 20s. Um, it's very inconsistent. No two diabetics need the same amount of insulin, even if they're the same height and weight and whatever. Different people might need different amounts of thyroid, of testosterone, whatever. And usually doctors recommend, even if your testosterone is a little bit on the lower side, if you're not having negative side effects, that you shouldn't take more. And there's some issues with testosterone. It naturally lowers in men as they get older. And it's worth noting that like higher testosterone puts you at higher risk of like, heart attack, those kinds of, sort of stress and anxiety related things that also raise as you get older. So it's probably, I mean, I don't know, but it's probably good that it kind of lowers as you get older. And so this is just like some sense of, you know, masculinity that's not based on any kind of science. No criticism. If somebody, feels like they need to take testosterone, great. That's why we have medicine. But it's weird to sort of force it on people, or even strong. It's not being, they could argue it's not being forced, but even strongly recommend, it seems like a weird thing.
To say the least. Yeah, it's this is Hegseth being Hegseth, right? He's the Secretary of Defense, but he calls himself the Secretary of War. He's gonna check everyone's testosterone annually to make certain they have enough to be able to be soldiers. And what's next? We're gonna get replacing saluting with punching the other person in the other person in the face when you see them, so you can prove that you're strong enough, or that you're superior enough, or whatever it is. It's just part of that kabuki, the conservative kabuki theater of what is man. And so we'll have to see how it plays out. And we'll have to see if there's, I don't know, if somebody challenges it, perhaps. It could be something that could go to a court case, maybe. But what it is not based on science, and not based on anything that's reasonable as far as military standard, or any sort of guide. The National Guard, continuing in Washington, the National Guard was brought in by Trump because, I don't know, DC's a scary place. Maybe I'm not really sure. There was a justification at the time that he had to bring in the National Guard to protect the Homeland Security people who were running around trying to shoot and kill people. Got to protect them for that. And their job was strictly to protect those Homeland Security people. So they couldn't do anything else. They weren't there to arrest criminals, or to repair broken windows, or whatever it is that it was touted they were there for. Um, and at the same time, they've kind of moved into doing that and challenging people and arresting them. And so it's not de escalating. And the fact that it has been made a permanent fixture of the administration until it leaves, certainly not a good sign for democracy, or rights, or whatever else you got now, for the time being. National Guard.
It feels like fascism 101, kind of like what I was saying about with the testosterone. Trump has many, many times said, he loves a military parade, he loves whatever. I'm sure this is his substitute for taking testosterone. Um, he just likes the idea of control. I'm sure the fact that it makes people nervous probably makes him happy.
Right, right. Too true. How about NBC? How about the media thing? NBC, ABC, CBS deciding not to cover his rant about the 2020 election, and then
Well,
whining about China.
you mentioned CBS, but they're actually not on this list. ABC, NBC, and CNN. CBS is the big major media company. Fox is its own deal, but they're the big major media company that didn't do it. And I just, one of the things that caught me after we were talking about the merger in the last segment is that if the Paramount Warner merger goes through, CNN will now be owned by CBS, so they wouldn't have this same level of freedom to choose not to run this Trump speech, because the people who run CBS are quite close with Trump.
That they are. Fair enough. I apologize for misspeaking there. I did mean, as I said, NBC, ABC, and CNN. And finally, so a little bit of home fascism being looked at here, the Tate brothers and their arrest in Miami to be extradited to the United Kingdom.
Excellent.
Just good news.
Yeah. I'm pretty anti-carceral, but I do not like the Tate brothers. They have done some very bad things.
Yeah, to say the least. All right, moving on.
The hell does that mean?
Oh,
Does that mean?
let's try one more time. There we go. What the hell
We
does
pretty
that?
much got it.
Yeah. This is what the hell does that mean? And we'll start with this week's version of that being socialism. What is socialism? And what isn't socialism? Perhaps is just as legitimate a question, certainly for some of the things that are being said about it currently. Of course, it's the ghost under the bed. It can be very scary and made out to be a terribly horrible thing. It can be conflated with communism. It can be mislabeled very easily, and certainly easily in mass media. So it is. But, Trump was claiming socialism conflates with communism and authoritarianism. Um, and he's negotiated for the government to receive a percent. Yet, right, we're talking about socialism and helping people or doing things that might help people, and he's trying to say, well, it's going to go to the extent of being taking over companies and doing all these things, and yet Trump himself is the one who's been negotiating with businesses to give a percentage of their profits to the government. He did it with Nvidia. He did 20%, and he's done a handful of others for somewhere between that. That 20% pops up a lot with him. I think it's just a number that really he likes a lot, but some less, some down as I believe as low as 5 or 6%, but up to 20%. And there was even a thing with Walmart apparently where he was making claims on behalf of the company that the company had to come out and say, this is no, that's not happening. I don't know what's going on here, but this is not the case. So he feels free to apply authoritarianism to even to the private sector. Here's government taking over, literally taking over the private segment, and he's saying, "Oh, but look out for socialism, where they might, help you fill in your potholes, or something like that." What do you think about socialism? What do you think about what the hell does that mean?
So yeah, so we wanted to do this segment just because um, socialism is a word that comes up a lot in communism and whatever in probably our discussions and a lot of political discussions, and it comes up a lot in the American political milieu. And it's just nice to kind of have a little segment to talk with some of these words that come up over and over again. Unfortunately, whole seasons and whole podcasts have been done about what socialism actually means, and you can look into those, and you should probably. But I guess for me, what's more interesting here is just asking, what are you being told that these things mean? Socialism is different from communism. A clue is that they have a different name, but it's definitely very different from authoritarianism. Now, can there be communist authoritarians? Of course. Can there be socialist authoritarians? Of course. Any economic or political system can have an authoritarian leader. Um, but just because somebody has had an authoritarian leader does not necessarily corrupt, everything behind it. And hopefully that's true because we have an authoritarian leader, and hopefully when he's gone, we can come back from it. So I just think it's worth having these kinds of questions about what people are telling you these things mean, especially in the United States, where you can lift up these words and not define them. Um, and I know talking to people, there's people who think that the Nazis were socialists and communists. And even though actually we worked with the communists at that time to fight them. Um, and it's just it's good to know what these words mean, especially when they get combined with authoritarian, right? Like you could love an ice cream shop, but an authoritarian ice cream shop is probably not a good idea. That doesn't corrupt ice cream.
Fair point. Fair point. Absolutely. Yeah, it's a sort of a callback to the Red Scare. You're trying to find the other side's trying to find a way to make things scary, and it's easy to do because people don't always. When people are making decisions based more on emotion than on what's going on or what is true, it's easy to take something and just with name calling make it as scary as possible, and then people jump on the bandwagon and it's scary. But it's also, as you say, it's good to read a book.
Or another podcast.
Or yeah, right, or jump in on some podcasts. Speaking of podcasts, we're going to move on to our final segment for the evening. We're going to check in on Stooges of the Week. You may recall this is a segment we've done in the past, and we are uh, bringing it back. And why is that? Well, Stooges of the Week include the teleprompter operator for Donald Trump. Now, this was a person who was involved at many stages of writing scripts, loading them into the teleprompter, knowing what was going to be said, and then he took bets on one of the predictive betting systems that are out there, and he was always betting on, hey, what's Trump going to talk about? What words are he going to use? Well, easy when you helped write the script to know what to bet on in that case, and of course, completely inappropriate and I'm sure illegal. Um, but this guy, while making a salary close to what the cabinet members were making, and this is just a guy who's operating the teleprompter, somehow he was able to maneuver himself into a salary that was equal to that of some of the cabinet members. Um, is also making cash off of that. And what was it? He made over $100,000 on these bets. So he was not there for the great wine of about 2020 elections, but good that he was discovered and moved out for something like that. I'm sure President Trump feels that he's done a perfectly good job and certainly shouldn't be harassed for just trying to get involved with online betting. Anything about the teleprompter guy before we move on?
No, but if you've been betting on this show, here's where we say crypto, Bitcoin, multiverse, metaverse, purple monkey dishwasher.
Perfect. um, and so one of the other issues of being a stooge this week, Howard Lutnick, who is a cabinet member, you may or may not have heard. Once upon a time, the Soviets dug tunnels in Kazakhstan in an attempt to mine tungsten. That was many years ago. They were never able to start the mining, but they did dig the tunnels. U.S. companies know about that and now are trying to find a way to get into those tunnels so they can get to the tungsten, which is now used even more as it's been something that's used in computer operations. So there's a bit more of a value to it. And it turns out that Lutnick and Trump wanted to move on these discussions, but it might. One of the motivators for doing that is their involvement in it, of course. As we mentioned earlier, if something's going on, then the primary concern for the president is to find a way to make some money off of it and see if there's a way that he or his family can benefit financially. Well, after the agreement was in place to check out these tunnels, the Trump government approved a $1.6 billion fund for use by American companies, including one called Kaz Resources. And that's a company, two of the owners or large donors into board members are Eric and Donald Trump. He might have recognized those names as being with the company, perhaps. And guess how much of a percentage Trump owns in Kaz?
20.
There you go, 20%.
Hey, there was a clue earlier. Good guess.
Famous for 20. And so it's funny he doesn't rename himself the 20th president. I swear. And then and on top of all that, Lutnick and his family have ownership in one of the other companies that supports Kaz Resources. So there's a way that everybody gets something out of it. And of course, that's the point I wanted to make. One last thing for this segment, which is the issue between the mayor of New York City, Mondami, and the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu. There are warrants out for Netanyahu through the International Court. The International Court is not officially recognized by the United States. However, those warrants do exist, and Netanyahu's coming to New York for the debate up at the United Nations, which is an annual event. He comes every year. Mondami made some statements about, hey, maybe it's time to arrest him based on those warrants. If you got warrants out for you, you can get arrested. And that caused a bit of a stir. And there was apparently a later announcement where Mondami withdrew the statement that he would arrest him, that he would arrest Netanyahu if he showed up. So, what have you heard?
I think today Mamdani released a statement saying that after discussing it, that he doesn't have the jurisdiction to do that, but he encouraged people to do it still. He's of a strong believer that, but two things, both that Mamdani believes that Netanyahu is correctly judged to be guilty of international crimes. And also, he stated that anybody that the ICC or the ICJ put out a warrant for, that he would hope it was respected by the international community. And so, yeah, it's not too surprising that he wasn't able to do that, especially as an unfortunately controversial mayor, even though he's done very little that's controversial. That's not true. He's not a perfect mayor. Nobody is. I even have some feelings about him, but broadly, he's well liked. I like him broadly. But this would definitely be a controversial move to make. So not too surprising, but I am glad that he said something, even kind of relating back to our very first segment about that it's surprising that this funding would get cut, and that there was APAC blowback. It's just another example of these like little rifts happening. And people should be allowed to say things, if not to get on my genocide high horse, but there's, one of the things about it is not saying anything about it, right? Like, it's actually one of the literal stages of genocide is like not saying it, not admitting to it, and there's a reason why there was things like the Nuremberg trials, whereas, other genocides have, like the Armenians have just sort of not been as well known. So.
Sure. All right. Well, we'll see if there's follow-up. If anybody picks up on it, we will know, and we'll certainly hear about it. That brings us to our last bit of business, which you just saw popped up there, the Epstein count-up, which for us is the the number of days since the unredacted Epstein list has not been released, and that's today at 4,054, and will continue to count, unfortunately, but true. Thanks for joining us for PolitiPod Live for Political Talk. You're welcome to join us every week right here for Political Talk on PolitiPod Live, Wednesdays, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. If you want a political laugh, you can join us and a dozen of our friends for PolitiPod, which can be found on soundcloud.com/PolitiPod.
This is Hannah Soldner.
And Matt Nisanoff saying goodbye.